in line with what we started from last week in terms of looking at the flexible economy. So we look at the exchange rate that happens to be pretty much flexible from our last meeting. And what we realized there was that indeed, if you have a flexible regime, there are a couple of things that might come to your favor and some that might not be favorable to you. An example was that we saw that when you are under a flexible regime, that is to say your exchange rate is flexible, you might be faced with a couple of shocks. This shock might be a nominal shock, or it might be a real shock. Under a nominal shock, this is where we saw the money supply from the rest of the economy increasing drastically. And from the real shock, this is where we saw the situation where R star for the world. Question? John?
I think somebody has their mic on still.
Yeah, that's good. If you have your mic on, please turn your mic off, right? Please turn your mic off. This is very important because if you speak like that, it kind of takes away the whiteboard and it shows your screen. And those who like to have access to the screen, they feel a bit disturbed by that. They cannot see what's going on. So when you come in here and you happen to be just a participant and not a moderator, please turn off your mic. Please again, turn off your mic. So the last time I saw that it was a bit worrying. So John, if you happen to have someone, having a screen showing up, please draw my attention and I'll come in to mute the person. Is that okay?
Yeah. Also, you can, for anyone who's interested, you can navigate to the professor's video feed if you have it open on the right side here in full screen mode, or on the top if you're in windowed mode, and click on it, and it will pin that video feed. So no matter who else talks, if anyone else does talk, it doesn't switch to anyone else's feed. It keeps it on the professor's. So
sure. Thanks, John.
Yeah, no worries.
Good. So we had these two situations that we tend to realize when you happen to find yourself in the flexible regime. It might be money supply going up. And when money supply goes up, the indication here was that the price level in the foreign markets also tends to go up. And we end up having a couple of things that might affect us. So this was a nominal effect, and this was the real effect. At the end of the day, when you're running a flexible exchange rate regime, the indication here was that your price level within your domestic market is not affected. It's unaffected whenever you have a flexible regime. Flexible regime with the nominal shock, your price level remains unaffected. So that was what we saw from our first analysis on Tuesday. For the second analysis on Tuesday, we had a real shock. And with the real shock, we realized that indeed the price level is affected. So your price is affected. So because your price level wasn't affected here, this is where we indicated that you are insulated, or you are pretty much protected from any shock that comes in terms of the nominal shocks. So you are protected as an economy from any shock that happens to be nominal. So just keep an eye here. If I'm running a flexible regime and I'm faced with a shock, I might be affected, I might not be affected. I'm only affected if I'm running, if I have a real shock. If I have a nominal shock, then I'm not affected. So when I'm having a real shock, if the shock from the world happens to be a real shock, then I'm unprotected. I'm affected, my economy is affected because my price level tends to change. So this is what we saw from last week, on Tuesday. What I'm going to do today is do the same analysis, but here, instead of you having a flexible regime, that is to say flexible exchange rate, we are going to change it to a fixed exchange rate. We are going to change it to a fixed exchange rate and see what we have here, see what we have here, and see the results. just reverse engineering, the result here in terms of the fixed exchange rate is going to be the opposite of what we saw in the flexible regime. So if you want to have this diagram for the flexible regime, you can do same. This guy is going to be the fixed regime. These are the shocks. Here, your price level is affected. Here, your price level is unaffected. Here, you are unprotected. And here, you will be protected. So that will be the analysis for today. But this will be the results before we step into the analysis. Who just joined in with the mic on? Sorry, John, did you see the screen or?
No, I have the video pin, so I don't think it shifted.
Jen, do you mind taking off your mic, Jen? Is this Jen? Do you mind taking off your mic? Okay.
Oh, and then we have 2 questions here.
Sure.
Someone asks, could you move your camera so that we can see more of the whiteboard? It's a little cut off. Yes, that's perfect.
Thanks for that.
And then another person asks, what do you mean by unprotected or protected?
Yeah, by unprotected, I mean that your price level. So if your price level doesn't change, I live in an economy, no matter what happens around me with regards to the rest of the economy, my prices are not affected. So in that case, as an individual, I'm not concerned as to what happens outside of my economy. But should something happen outside of my economy, and then the next day the price level starts changing, then am I supposed to be worried? Yes. Do I feel protected? No. Is that okay? Yeah. John, was the 2 questions, or is there any extra?
Oh no, the first question was about the whiteboard.
Okay. So then we can start right away if we don't have any questions as to the background. We're going to start by looking at the fixed regime. So this part of the chapter is very intuitive in terms of you understanding the fixed regime. The results of the fixed regime is mostly the opposite of the flexible regime when you are analyzing the policy implications here and there. So just keep an eye on that. But the most important thing is get to see how you play around with the equations and then the graph. So I'm going to start by looking at the fixed regime and see where to start from. So by now, I know that we have the understanding of the changes in the exchange rate. So the changes in the exchange rate, remember we have 2 types, right? So I'm going to look at the fixed exchange rate. And with the fixed exchange rate, remember we have the situation whether you might be going with the hard peg or you might be going with the soft peg. So here, we are going to pay attention to the soft peg. So this is where, indeed, your exchange rate is really fixed, but you are more likely to change it time to time. So you've promised that your exchange rate is going to be 1 to maybe 2, but in the next few months, you might change it maybe 1 to 3. The next coming month, it might be 1 to 4. Even though it is fixed, it changes. So that's what we call a soft peg. With a hard peg, it's very hard for you to change it. When you keep it to 1 to 2, it's going to be there for some time, for a long time. So given the fact that you now have an exchange rate which is fixed, but it is soft, then there's a tendency for your exchange rate to be moving up and down. To be moving up and down. So in a situation where you change it to increase its value, and then we call it revaluation, just like what we saw on Tuesday. So this is what we saw on Tuesday in terms of the definition. In a situation where it tends to go down, then we call it the devaluation or the depreciation. So these are the 2 indication, the two terminologies that we have to understand as we open up our economy and use the fixed exchange rate. So
Sorry,
revaluation.
we just have another question here.
Sure, feel free.
Is soft peg the same as managed floating?
I wouldn't say that. I would say it's more or less like a combination of the two. If you say managed floating, remember floating is more or less the same thing as the flexible regime, but with the flexible regime, there are instances where at times you have a certain threshold that it shouldn't go above or it shouldn't go below. So the market will determine it. But when the market comes in and determines the value of the exchange rate and it goes beyond a certain threshold, then you come in and correct it. So that might be the managed floating, right? But in the case of the soft peg, you've promised that it's going to be 1-for-1 or 1-to-2. So it's just going to be like that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is a good question. Let me see whether I can further explain. So what he's asking about in terms of the exchange rate, we have, let's take the soft peg. They promise that exchange rate is going to be 1-to-2. In the next, so it's going to be 1-to-2 today, 1-to-2 tomorrow. Regardless of what the market does, the central bank is just going to keep it to 1-to-2, right? In the managed floating, for instance, if I understand the terminology right, in the managed floating, here, this guy, the exchange rate is determined by the market. The market determines it. So today it might be 1, in the afternoon it might be 2, in the evening it might be 3. It changes within the same day. No matter what happens, it changes. But the managed part of it is the central bank might go like, even though the market determines this value of the exchange rate, we don't want a situation where it will go above 10 or it will go below 0.5. So no matter what the market does, provided it's within this range, the central bank is fine, right? Provided it's within this range, the central bank is fine. If it is 1, if the market plays out and it turns out to be 3, it turns out to be 4, the central bank is okay. The only time that the central bank will come in to correct it is when it hits the highest point, which is 10. Or it hits the lowest point, which is 0.5. Then you might want to call it the managed system, even though it happens to be floating. Yeah.
So in that vein, would we say that the system used in countries like Canada, the US, a lot of countries in Europe, would that be more akin to managed floating?
Yeah, there are a couple of targeting interest rate or targeting inflation and all that. I know the Central Bank of Canada has targeting or a targeted inflation. I don't know the policy in terms of their targeting when it comes to exchange rate. It's not a major concern for them. Their trading partner is mostly the US, and I've never come across a situation where they have a combination of the two. Exchange rate is not really crucial for the central bank of the central bank. But what I realize is they are very concerned about the inflation. So they target the inflation whenever it goes above a certain threshold, then they'll come in and then correct it. Or they tell the people that this is our target, right? So people tend to understand that this is the target for the inflation. But for the exchange, I've not come across it.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Sure. So if you have further questions, just let me know. So we have the situation where we now have a soft peg, and with a soft peg, just remember that it's possible that the exchange rate might change. Even though we call it fixed, it might change if it is soft. So that's what I wanted to point out here. Now let's start by looking at what we tend to see under this policy. Let's take the situation where you have this guy here. They promise us an exchange rate, which is E, which is 1-to-2. This is the exchange rate that they promise us. In the situation where things get out of hand and this exchange rate now moves up to the situation where we have 1, 2, maybe 3, then the central bank will have to come in and correct for this and send it back to 1 to 2. Now, we need to understand how this mechanism works. How will this mechanism work? So we have a situation where more or less like the market plays out and there's been depreciation in the market, and the central bank is coming in to correct for this change and bring it back to 2. So this is where you need to understand the whole idea of money supply and how money supply plays out in trying to correct for this. If this is what the central bank has promised, which is 1 to 2, and the market plays out such that we now need, it's now 1 to 3, that is to say, you need 3 of your local currencies to buy 1 USD, you need 2 to buy 1 USD. Why will this be the case? What are some of the things that might play out for us to have this depreciation in the first place? One point here is, it might be the case that there is no confidence in our local markets anymore. So nobody wants to hold our money. And if individuals are not interested in holding our money, then they will just throw out our money. And when people throw out your money, that is to say, there's no demand for your money and there is excess supply of your money, then your money will tend to depreciate. And that's how come we move from here to here. So here we have this issue of depreciation because of issues like excess supply of our local currency or less demand for our local currency. These are things that might play out for us to have this type of exchange rate. Now, if this, yeah, sorry, Alex.
Oh, yes. Does 1 to 2 to 1 to 3 mean appreciation, i.e. E goes down?
Sorry. So what I mean by that, remember I'm calling this guy your local currency. Just like our definition from our last week, we are looking at it in terms of you buying the foreign currency, right? Yeah. So this is like getting 1 unit of the foreign currency, getting 1 unit of the foreign currency. So it's going to be depreciation, right? Last week we did, I placed a 1 on the far end. That's what I did last week, yeah. So don't be confused by that, right? It's okay. I can change it if it's okay, but if it's fine, we can go ahead.
And then Ella asks, so it's not a range, but a ratio?
Yeah, it's most likely a ratio if you want to look at it from that perspective, or it's most likely how you quote it from one to the other. When I quote 1 to 2, I can just transform it to ratio as well. So that shouldn't be an issue. The most important thing I would like you guys to capture here is initially 2 of my domestic currencies was able to buy 1 unit of the foreign currency. And 3 of my domestic is now buying 1. So I've depreciated. I now need more of my domestic to buy 1 unit of my foreign. All good?
Yeah. Oh, is the sign of the second E opposite?
The second E is up because you now need more. So this is what we call depreciation, right? Remember from the graph from last week, whenever E goes up, what did we call that? When E increases, what did we call it? John, did you remember what we called it from last week whenever E goes up?
When E goes up, it was appreciation. Oh, sorry, my apologies, depreciation.
It was depreciation, yeah.
Yeah.
So E is up because we now need more of the domestic to buy the foreign. So it is depreciation.
And then do we say depreciation or devaluation since this is under a fixed exchange rate regime?
That's a good question. We might want to call it, at first, you might want to call it depreciation because the market is now playing in to bring down the value of our currency, right? If we intentionally come in to increase our money supply such that this happens, then we might be confident enough and then say that this is a devaluation from our side. But if, for instance, we didn't do anything as a central bank, something might have happened and it just led to this systemic change due to the market forces playing out, then we might want to call it a depreciation coming in. Then That might be a word to use because it's more or less coming from the market instead of coming from us. You might want to call it devaluation as well. That wouldn't be a problem.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is what we have, right? And these are the reasons why we might see this guy going up. So please keep an eye on this. I should have placed the one. Yep. Question?
Oh, no, I don't think so. I think that was just someone with their mic again.
Okay. So again, if you come in with the mic, I don't want to be, repeating the same instruction, but just for those who like to pay attention with regards to the page, and for my recording as well, please take your mic off when you come in. So this is what we have, and back to Jay's question, you might want to put it this way, just to take away the confusion, right? This is what we saw from last week. Now, this is what we have. Now, how will the market come in and correct for this? The central bank can come in and correct for this by either attacking this guy. The reason why we have depreciation is because, or Alex might want to call it devaluation as well, I don't have an issue with that, is because there is excess supply in the market. So what the central bank can now do here is, it will go like, hey, due to this excess supply, why not take away our money from the market to reduce this excess supply? Why not buy back our local currency so that our local currency will no longer be in excess supply and we should be fine then? And how would they do that? This is where the idea of foreign reserves comes in. So for every central bank, it has an amount of foreign currency that it has with it, in addition to its local currency. So what this foreign currency does here is, or foreign reserve, they will use this foreign currency or foreign reserve to buy back their local currency or domestic currency. So when you use your foreign currency to buy the domestic currency, at the end of the day, but with this action, the supply of your currency will therefore reduce. The supply of your currency will now reduce. So excess supply will now go down. And your exchange rate will come back to normal. So when excess supply goes down, your exchange rate will go back to where you point it to. So that will be the transition process that you need to further correct for this movement, either above the point that you promised or below the point that you promised to be your fixed point. Is that okay? If you have questions, let me know.
Yes, so the initial problem was excess supply of foreign currency or domestic currency? Domestic
currency, right? Excess supply of your currency, right? Because individuals are not interested in holding your currency anymore. So they are just selling it out. They don't believe in your economy anymore, so they are just selling it out. So your currency happens to be a lot in the system and nobody is valuing it. So how do you reduce this excess money in the system? You can just use all the foreign currencies that you have, parts of it, throw it into the market and buy back your domestic currency. And when you do that, your currency will go back to normal. It will take away this excess supply and you get back the equilibrium point where you promised. Oh, yeah. Questions, John?
No, not right now.
Good.
Oh, sorry, I spoke too soon.
Yeah.
Under a fixed regime, a shock causes depreciation and then the central bank will reevaluate the exchange rate or revalue the exchange rate?
It wouldn't revalue the exchange rate. So at this point in time, it is not a revaluation of the exchange rate because they've not changed the points that they had initially. The initial point that they had was 2-1. We had market forces playing out and it shifted it to 3-1. Now with this, what they did here was to bring it back to 2-1. So there is no revaluation at the end of the day because it didn't change from 2-1. And there is no devaluation at the end of the day because it didn't change from 2-1. If what they did was to change this point here from 2 to 1, which was their initial promise point, to a point like 5 to 1, then you might want to call it devaluation then, right? But if that wasn't the case, what the policy did was just to bring them back to where they initially promised us, then they've not done any devaluation of their currency. Yeah. Is that okay, John?
Yeah, it seems so.
Good. So just keep this guy in mind, get to see how it works in terms of the changes, and we can now go ahead. One thing I would like to draw your attention here is that how money tends to be in the system, the nature of money, supply. So remember, we are still within the fixed regime. So we are still within the fixed regime, and we need to look at how money plays within this system. So I'm going to draw 1 or 2 graphs, I believe, at this point, and I would like to turn you guys back to page 451, which is the same as graph 16.7. So this is what we have here. And with this graph, I want to point out something really key, and that was related to the example that I gave in terms of the bringing back the exchange rate to the point where you promise it to be. So remember this guy from last week, which is your money demand equation. You might want to call it MD equals EP star, L as a function of Y and R star. And this guy here happens to be your money supply. And this guy here happens to be your exchange rate. This is your money supply and money demand. And this is your exchange rate. This is your E1. The E1 that we saw. An example here was, the E1 was, I believe 2 to 1. If Ian's example is correct. So 2 to 1. With this graph, what I'm going to point out here is how money supply plays out in the system, the nature of money supply. Let's take the situation where you increase your money supply to this point. You've increased your money supply to this point. What happens to your exchange rate? Your exchange rate will tend to depreciate to E2, right? Assuming, coming back to your question, assuming that your true promise fixed exchange rate happens to be E1, and you increase your money supply and your exchange rate tends to depreciate. If you promise us that your exchange rate is going to be 2 to 1, which is E1 bar, what should you do then? Do you have the right to increase money supply? Yes or no? Do you have the right to increase money supply? Yes or no?
You do, right? Well, the government does, but the central bank does.
Yeah, so you are, yeah, let's assume that you have the chance to increase money supply. Can you increase your money supply or not? So this is to the class, right? Can you increase your money supply just like what I did with the red line or not? Remember the implication of no. And why is it no? Why do we think it's no? Why do we think that you cannot increase your money supply? Exactly, you cannot change E. And that's the intuition. This is very, very important. You don't change E. If this is your fixed exchange rate regime, and this is going to be very important as we play along with this guy. This is a fixed exchange rate regime. You promise this particular E1, and the money supply that goes with it is this guy here. If you arbitrarily increase your money supply to this point, the implication is that your exchange rate will tend to depreciate, which means you violated your promise of having a fixed exchange rate regime at the point of E1. You violated it. So if someone comes to you and tell you, hey, you violated what you just promised us right now, what do you think you can do to correct this? Yeah, questions?
We can increase Y to shift MD, right?
Yeah, but that will be coming from the raw market in terms of the labor market and then in terms of the goods market, and we are not there yet, right? Because here we are looking at here we are just looking at the money markets from the central bank, right? So what do we do? Did someone bring up a solution?
Reduce MS again or sell foreign reserves.
Exactly. We have to reduce MS again back to this point. So here we are more or less not having control over our money supply. We don't have control over it anymore. If we've promised a certain exchange rate and there's a given money supply that goes with it, anytime you go above it or we go below it, we will tend to violate this fixed exchange rate that we give. So if initially we did the red line, which is an increase in money supply, E will tend to go up. So we have to get back to our E1. And thus, we need to reduce our money supply such that our E comes back to normal. So E goes back to E bar. So we don't have any control over the money supply there.
Okay, so we will be selling or buying foreign reserves?
Yeah, so if in the first place we printed money and we sent it out to increase the money supply, which is we are trying to buy more of the foreign currency, then with the second point, we do now have to go in and sell in the foreign currencies and get more of our local currencies to reduce our local money supply.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then another person asks,
yeah.
Can't we increase money demand exactly to E1?
No, so remember, money demand is coming from these guys here, right? Money demand is coming from these guys here, your Y, your R star. We've not yet started looking at those guys yet. Yeah. Questions? So here, just coming back to what John asked, what you did with this red line, which is the first movement, in terms of increasing your money supply, this will increase your foreign reserves because you use it to buy more foreign currencies. This is just an example, right? Now, what Ella pointed out to bring us back to normal will be for us to sell our foreign reserves to buy our domestic currencies. So our foreign reserves will now come down in terms of you looking at how it plays out relative to the foreign currency. John, is that okay? Did I answer your question?
I think so. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, so when you print more money, yeah.
Sorry, one more. From black to red, will the central bank do an open market operation?
Exactly. It's possible that you might do open market operation, or buy more bonds and sell more of your bond, buy more of your bonds, buy more bonds. If you buy bonds, you just use monies that you have and what's not, or you can sell bonds. In that case, it brings it back. Open market operation works in that direction. Foreign currency, acquiring foreign currencies will also work in that direction as well.
Oh,
right?
I had a question. It might be a bit silly, but if we're trying to lower money supply back to the level that it was before in order to reestablish E, wouldn't buying... Oh, okay, never mind. I think I've thought of it myself, sorry.
So back to what Alex just pointed out, that was a very good point as well. Instead of using foreign currency requirements, you can use OMO, open market operation. Look at how open market operation can also work out. You can read on that as well. Questions, there, John?
Yes. Under a fixed rate system, what happens when your currency depreciates relative to the world and people want to export more? How does the central bank maintain the fixed rate?
Yeah, so we come back to how the exchange rate plays out. And that was back to, I think, what either John or Alex asked on Tuesday, as in we expect exchange rate to affect net export and all that. We'll come back to that. For this particular chapter, because of what we call the law of one price, right? And then, yeah, the law of one price and the purchasing power parity. Nominal exchange rate will not affect the export and import. But when we go to the new Keynesian model within this same setup, that's where you see exchange rate playing a role. Nominal exchange rate playing a role on the net export. So just keep an eye on that. Is that okay?
Okay, yep. And then we have one more.
Yep.
Is it more the case that we do an open market operation in the first place and then sell foreign reserves then? Because the central bank knows that buying foreign reserves will change E in the first place. Will the central bank still do that?
It depends on the trouble that they are faced with, right? It might be an intentional, it might be an intentional action from them. It might be a shock that's coming from outside. It might be a mistake from their side. So you don't necessarily have a particular starting point, right? We don't necessarily have a particular starting point. So if, for instance, there's a shock, then the central bank will just come in and try and correct it as much as possible, using either tool that they think might be sufficient enough. So if, for instance, the market is closed or the interest rate on the world market is extremely high and they don't want to go pay high interest on any bond that they tend to buy, and they think they have enough reserves, then they will just go with the foreign reserves, maybe solve the foreign reserves and get back enough of their local currencies and get things pretty much, stabilized. But if that's not a viable option, then they will go with the open market operation. So there are a couple of things that they can do. It's not see it has to go from this transition to the other. No. You are open to do what you think is best for you, and there's no particular starting point.
Okay, but will the open market operation change E, i.e. from red to green? I was thinking...
Possible.
Okay.
It's possible. Open market operation can change E, because open market operation, you might want to sell bonds or you might want to buy them. If you want to buy them, you need money to do that, and you have to print money. And as soon as you print money, money supply increases. So that's one channel.
Oh, okay. I was thinking open market operation only matters for domestic, but not the foreign exchange market.
You remember your currency is being priced in terms of the other currencies as well. So if internally you increase your money supply, people are also holding your money elsewhere. So when your money supply is extremely too high, inflation is going to be affected. And if inflation is affected, your money is trying to be worthless then. So if I happen to be outside of Canada and I've seen that the Central Bank of Canada is printing too much money and I have a lot of Canadian dollars with me, then I'll go like, hey, I need to be very careful here. With this extra printing of money, this Canadian dollar that I have with me is going to be worthless. Why not just sell it and get more of the USD? Question?
Yes. Oh, so central bank can use an open market operation to manage E as well, and not only do it through foreign reserves?
Yeah, that's why I use these 2 points, right? You can use open market operation. Yeah. So let me know if you have further questions. If not, then let's start by looking at what we saw from last week. So if you happen to be around, type your full name and type present. And again, all the late response attracts 0 points, as I pointed out earlier. So we start by looking at what we did on Tuesday. So here we are looking at nominal shock. Let's look at nominal shock in the fixed regime, right? Nominal shock in the fixed regime. So we have nominal shock in the fixed regime. So with this nominal shock, just like what we saw on Tuesday, this is where we had the money supply from the foreign markets increasing. And because of that, what we saw was, we saw that this will increase the prices in the foreign markets as well. Now, if this is the case, we now have to draw our domestic money, our money market here, which is this guy here, money demand, as a function of E, P star. I believe this guy is going to be L as a function of Y and R star. And this is our money supply. This might be our initial point where we promise our exchange rate is going to be. And this is the point where we have our money supply and money demand. So this is going to be our graph for the start. Now, because of this nominal shock from the foreign market, it will increase our P star. And as our P star increases, this line will tend to shift towards this direction, just like what we saw on Tuesday. So this is going to be P star, L, Y, R star. Okay, so this is what comes out of it. Now, ideally, we should be ending up with this particular interest exchange rate, which is E2. But remember, the central bank has already promised us that E bar will forever be E bar. So unlike the flexible regime where the money supply is more or less exogenous, that is to say, it does not respond to changes to this guy, within the fixed regime, money supply is endogenous. So keep that one in mind. Money supply is endogenous because it has to respond to the changes in the demand that we just saw.
Oh, okay.
So here,
sorry, we have a question.
Sure.
Will money be neutral in this case before the nominal shock?
Yeah, money is going to be neutral within the fixed as well. But when we open it up to the new Keynesian model as a model with the assumption of sticky price, then money wouldn't be neutral. Remember, we are not under the new Keynesian, yeah. So here, the central bank will have to respond by increasing money supply such that this guy will come back to E bar. My red line is not drawn to scale. So the central bank will have to increase the money supply such that this guy here will now go back to normal, right? So just keep in mind, because of this reaction to the changes in demand, money supply is endogenous in this setup for the fixed regime. Money supply is endogenous. Keep it in mind. Money supply is endogenous in this sense. So that's what we've seen in terms of the reaction. Now, what do we see in terms of the equation? Using the same equation, we had E, P star equals P. E bar is not changing because the central bank is reacting to the changes in demand. So E bar will forever be E bar. P star has increased. And when P star has increased, there should be an equal increase in P to maintain this balance. So P will also increase. So that's why we say with a nominal shock and a fixed regime, the prices are unprotected. You are uninsulated. That's a result that I showed you guys before we started today. So when you have a fixed regime, fixed exchange rate regime with a nominal shock, then you are not going to have your prices to be stable in this shock environment. Is that okay with everyone? So if you have questions, let me know. Okay,
No,
we go to
okay.
yeah, all good, right?
Yes. Oh, we have one. Will the increase in P be caused by the increase in P star or the increase in money supply?
Any intuitive explanation that you might want to give it is fine, because it starts from somewhere. Remember, money supply and prices move hand in hand when you use the very naive money supply markets that we saw earlier. They go in proportionate terms. Remember the example that I gave I gave in terms of you going to Tim Hortons. If you happen to have $1 and the prices of the prices there happens to be $1, that's fine. But if the next morning your daddy gave you $1,000 and you go to Tim Hortons and the prices also will have to adjust to the changes in the nominal money supply. So the prices also go to 1,000. So it's more or less like 1-to-1 to maintain the balance, and that's why money is neutral in this respect as well. Yeah. Is that okay? So then we can then look at the real shock if we don't have issues with the nominal shock. Let's have a look at the real shock. Let's have a look at the real shock. So the real shock that we saw here was the changes in R star. And this was the same example that we saw on Tuesday. So R star goes up, maybe because of the shock in the foreign market. There is a reduction in productivity and R star is up, and that's what we started looking at. So if this changed, we realized that there are one or two things that might happen. I'm not going to draw the graph because we saw the graph on Tuesday. What we realized here was that with an increase in R star, Y is going to increase if we assume that the effect of increase of Y on money is greater than the effect of increase in R star on money demand. So the effect of increase of this guy on money demand is greater than the effects of increase in R star on money demand. This is what we saw on Tuesday. This guy is going to increase. So I'm just quickly going to draw the money markets as well. So here we had E, we had M, we had money demand, which is E, P star, L as a function of R star. This guy affects money demand positively. This guy affects money demand negatively. This is a foreign.
Sorry, your screen has disappeared.
I think I'm running on a low battery. Is that okay? Is it okay now?
Yes. Yeah, it's back.
Okay. So this is what we saw, right? Then we have this money supply, and we have this promised exchange rate. Nothing has changed. Now, when this guy goes down and R star goes up and YD goes up because of this assumption, then we need to change the money demand as well. So the money demand is going to increase. So we have money demand going towards this direction. When money demand increases, remember in this fixed exchange rate regime, money supply is endogenous. It moves in line with the changes in the money demand to maintain the promised exchange rate. So if that's the case, I'm going to draw my green line, which is my new money supply that will help maintain this promised exchange rate. So we have exchange rate being the same, our money supply increasing. Why not go back to our equation? Remember, our equation happens to be E, P star equals P. When this change happened in the foreign market, there wasn't any assumption or there wasn't any change in the foreign price. So foreign price is the same. No changes in foreign price. When we came to our domestic money supply market, we realized that we endogenously reacted to the changes in the demand such that our E was fixed. So our E bar was fixed, it remained unchanged. Now, what happens to our price? Our domestic price. Our domestic price will also remain unchanged. So with the real shock, prices remain unaffected. So that's what I call protected. You are not afraid of any real shock when you have a fixed regime. But when you have a fixed regime and the shock happens to be nominal, then the prices will change. Questions? Done?
No questions as of right now, no.
Good. It means everything is fine. If that's okay, then we can go ahead and look at the a further shock, which is going to be an internal shock, but it's an internal real shock. So just keep an eye on that. I don't need to have more water to get this there. Let me see the time as well, whether it's okay for us to continue. Yeah, let's use 10 minutes. Then we'll go for a break just after this. So let's quickly use about 10 minutes to finish this additional shock in terms of devaluation. Then we go for a break, then we'll come back. So we still have the fixed regime, and this shock is what we call a domestic shock, but it's a domestic real shock. So this is what you might find, I believe, on page, you find it on page 453 on figure 16.9. So we're going to look at domestic real shock. 16.10 rather, 16.10. So let me get the diagram up and running. There's a temporal decrease in domestic. So imagine we have this guy here. So within the fixed regime, we are going to analyze how a domestic real shock affects issues like revaluation of your currency and devaluation of your currency, how it will affect issues like devaluation of your currency and revaluation of your currency. So, yeah.
Sorry,
Kristen?
I just had a question. So when you say a domestic real shock, that can't involve R because R is set in the world market, correct? So would that be like a destruction of K or a decrease in total factor productivity, or what do you mean when you say real domestic shock?
Maybe, yeah, you might look at the situation where maybe the technology you use to produce your goods within your domestic market has deteriorated. Nobody is having any innovative way of producing, so your Z is down. So domestically, your Z is down. So your supply, your output supply is going to go down. That would be one way of looking at it. But the R star is just going to be R star as we assume. It's not going to change. Is that okay?
Okay. Yes, thank you.
So we have, let's plot the initial points. Let's take this guy to be our YD, our initial point for YD, our initial point for YS, with a domestic shock, and I believe this guy happens to be a reduction, right? So yeah, there's a reduction in the domestic, there's a shock which happens to be domestic, but it's a reduction, so that means I have my output supply to go down. So we are moving towards this direction. So just a way of reminder, what is our real, our market price, John, our market price for the interest rate happens to be this guy. So nothing has changed over here. Now with this guy here, with this shock, which is Z is going to go down, an example reduction in Z, our output supply is going to reduce. So we have our output supply going towards this direction. The same thing happens because of increasing factors like your income and all that. We also have the situation where your demand is also going to come down. So we have demand also coming down. So at the end of the day, just like what I pointed out to Tanya, we still have the same interest rate. You don't affect the interest rate with your own reaction. The interest rate for the market is still maintained. So that's what we see in the goods market with this effect. So just keep an eye on this as we draw and analyze the money market as well. So let's take the situation where we have the money market and we have the money demand, which is equal to EEP star, which is Y as a function of R star. This might be our first line. This might be our money supply for the first point, and this might be the exchange rate. The exchange rate that we assumed. Now, with this, what do we see? Anyone to help me with this? What do we see? With this effect here, with Y reducing, what happens to the money market? Anyone in there?
Yeah, the money demand would shift left.
Exactly. The money demand will shift left because money demand will reduce. So technically, we have a situation where money demand goes. So here, the central bank is not the one coming in with money supply to change things. It is the real shock that affected this money demand. So what do we see? E will now move from E1 to E2. So when there's a real shock of this case, there's going to be an initial devaluation. So if the central bank goes like, hey, we didn't cause this shock, we still kept our promise, but the real factors happens to play out, and we don't want to do anything. We don't want to touch any money supply. We don't want to touch anything to change the market. Then the only conclusion you might make from this is the central bank will now have to, or the government will now have to devalue their currency. Is that okay? If they make their decision that they wouldn't want to change anything here, then they will have to devalue their currency. But if they go like, hey, we still have enough foreign reserves, we can correct for this, then they can come in and maybe reduce the money supply back to, I believe, this point, if I'm right, to maintain the same point. Is that okay? Is that okay? John?
Yes, I think so.
Mm-hmm. Money supply 2, money supply 1, they can reduce the money supply to maintain what they promised.
Yeah, so central bank can choose to either change MS or change E.
They can change E, they can change E only through changing MS. Or you might want to say in terms of the changing the quotation, then they can change E right away. In terms of they saying that, hey, we don't want 3 of our currency to 1 anymore, then they can just come in and devalue it and say that now our currency is maybe 2 to 1. Then that's devaluation. That's fine. You can say that they can then change their E. That's okay. But if there is a mistake in the market and they still want to keep what they promised and they would like to make sure that things come back to normal, then they will have to use the money supply to bring the E back to normal.
Okay, and then we have, so the central bank can choose to do nothing when the foreign shock occurs.
Yeah, they can choose to do nothing. And in that case, what they are doing now is they are now telling us that, hey, instead of our promise of 2 to 1, our promise is now maybe 3 to 1. In that case, they are devaluing it. They don't want to do anything. They don't want to touch the money supply.
Okay, and then just to confirm, so devaluation is when they let E change to where the market changed it.
Devaluation is more or less like changing the fixed point that you promise us, right? That you promise us. That's more of the devalue. You've devalued the currency.
Will the new devalued currency be equal to E2?
Yeah. It will be equal to this guy. If you want to go with devaluation without attacking anything in the market, then this will be the new guy here. But if you want to bring us back to normal, then you use your money supply to bring us back to the fixed point that you promised us.
Okay, so actually, I just have a question. So when a shock like this happens and we have a decrease in money demand in a fixed exchange system, we have kind of We can either, if we want to keep our exchange rate exactly as it was before, we can reduce to E1.
Yeah.
Or what we can do is we can also just readjust our fixed exchange rate to now be E2 and then don't do anything other than that.
Yeah, and tell the people this is our new exchange rate now. We've devalued it.
And then someone asks, will the central bank choose to do nothing because the lack of foreign reserves, usually?
That's one point. Yeah. But in this case, they don't necessarily need foreign reserves, right? In this case, they don't need foreign reserves. Is that okay? Because here they are looking at reduction in money supply. They need foreign reserves for sure. Yeah, they need foreign reserves. Sorry, that's my bad. They need to increase money supply. Yeah, if they don't have enough to do that, and if on the market people take their if they go to the open market and people take their bonds to be junk, like Argentina, because it defaulted without paying its debt, then they can't go to the market in the first place because their bonds are technically junk. Nobody will buy it, and they can also use foreign reserve because they don't have enough. So they'll just keep on devaluing their currency in that sense. They are a bit restricted.
So in that vein, would it usually be better for the central bank to just revalue because they to increase or decrease the money supply would cost them extra money, or
If they don't have the power to use the money supply. And one thing we need to keep in mind here, if you are a country that runs a fixed regime, right, and you promise people that this is going to be 2-1, and the next morning you go like, no, it's going to be 3-1, and the next day you go like, no, it's going to be 4-1, and they will lose confidence in your money, right? They wouldn't want to hold it anymore. So even though it comes at a cost of you issuing bonds or you reducing money supply, you for sure need to maintain this E-bar for people to have confidence in holding your money. Revaluing it all the time will lead to disaster or a collapse in your currency, right? So unless you are really, really, really stacked, you are really restricted, you don't have enough foreign reserves, or you cannot go to the market, then the only option left for you is keep on devaluing. And as you keep on devaluing, nobody is interested in holding your money anymore.
So it's like a trade-off between holding the confidence of the people and spending your foreign reserves or buying foreign reserves in order to shift the money supply.
Yeah.
Okay. But if central bank can use an open market operation, they can still maintain E in any case.
Yeah, they can. But again, remember, even open market operation, some people might take your bond to be a junk bond because your risk is very high. I wouldn't want to go in and hold any bond of any country that I don't really know or I don't really understand. Yeah. Is that okay? If it's okay, then type your full name, type present, then go for 5 minutes break, and we'll be back at 10:46. Yeah, so what I would like you guys to do here is please go to the book and read more on the fixed exchange rate versus the flexible exchange rate, and look at the situation where it's advisable for a country to have a fixed exchange rate versus a situation where it's supposed to have a flexible exchange rate. So there's a couple of factors that we need to consider. How stable is the economy of the country? What is the political influence that it might have on the central bank and all that? So read on that. You might see it in the finals. So just keep an eye on that. That's going to be on page 455. That is flexible versus fixed exchange rates. Just keep an eye on that. And Alex also asked a question, or I believe it might be John, on Tuesday as to why we don't have an effect from the exchange rate to the net exports. On the same page, you see a response to that as well, given that first part of the model. So just keep an eye on that. If you're okay, then I'll start. If there's any question, just let me know. John, I've not forgotten your question on the outline. I'll try to make it available on Tuesday. So John asked a question as to what the outline needs to be in terms of our course for the second part. So I'll try and give you guys a detailed roadmap as to what we've done so far. That will be on Tuesday. Yeah. So what I'm going to point out here for this part of the lecture is we are going to use what we call capital control. Capital control might be, we have capital accounts and we have current accounts, and they all form part of the balance of payments. So when you read the book, it is more intuitive. You can read it and have a look at that. So for now, the reading on the capital accounts and then the current accounts and the balance of payment in terms of the amount and all that, that's very self-explanatory. So I'm going to skip the explanation given there. What I'm going to focus on this, on that part of the section is what we call the capital control, as in the amount of capital that you are expected to send out outside of your economy and the amount of capital that you are being restricted to send out. So here, we're going to analyze capital control regardless of whether you have a fixed or flexible regime. We want to see how capital control works out. So keep an eye and let me know whether you have questions. So this is the capital control mechanism. We start by looking at one particular shock, and I believe it's a shock that we saw just about now in terms of the real shock, and let's see how capital control plays out. Yeah, so again, I have this guy here. I have this guy here to be my YD, my demand. I have this guy here to be my YS, which is my supply. And I have, this is the world interest rate, R star, nothing, yeah, this is my R star. This is my Y1, this is my Y1. This is the output that I expect to have in the economy. Let's see what they label it to be. Yeah, it was Y1 as well. Now, again, there's a temporal shock, and that has reduced our Z. And because Z is a function, because Z affects our output, Y is going to come down. Our output supply goes down and what's not. So I'm going to draw the output reduction graph, just like what we saw before the break. So this guy here goes towards this direction, because there's a reduction in our output supply. And this is a capital control, just a reminder. And again, because of the reduction in Z, as we saw earlier, YD will also come down. So YD also comes down to YD2. And this is our YD, YS2. So we have these guys here, and this guy technically is supposed to be our Y2 when we have to maintain the R star in a given system. So that's just what we saw earlier. Nothing really new here. Our money market, the same argument holds. Again, we assume that the reduction in money demand, we have this guy here. We have money supply here. I believe we have our exchange rate here. We have our money. We have P, EP star as a function of our Y and R star. And we have this guy somewhere here. We have our exchange rates here. This might be our initial exchange rate. Now, what happens to the money demand curve? Anyone to help me? Given what happened to the shock, anyone in there to help me?
It's going to shift left, correct? Go down?
Yeah, it's going to go to the left. It's going to go down. That's correct. So we have this guy here. We're going to come here. And this is going to be E2. So this is what we saw earlier. And we have M as a function of E, P star, L, Y, R star. So this is fairly standard. Nothing new about this. This is what we just saw before the break. If you have questions, let me know. What I would like to point out here is very key. So let's see. Let's take the situation where there is a capital control. Okay. By capital control, think of it in this line, even though it's not in the exact same line. Think of it as the amount of net exports that you can have, how much people can come in and get in terms of your local goods, and how much you can also go and buy in terms of the foreign goods. That's a very naive way of looking at it. If you read the book, they tend to talk about it in terms of like capital inflows with regards to investment and capital outflows. So read about that. But for now, think about it in terms of the net export and how the net export tends to affect your demand curve. If you think about it along that line, then things might look a bit easier for you to understand. So let's imagine the situation where we saw earlier. Remember, the only reason why this guy had to move to this side was because of the reduction in the net exports, which will try as much as possible to maintain this R star. It's always necessary to maintain this R star, and the only way we can do that is to shift this guy. And as we shift this guy, we assume that everything is coming from this guy, from the net export. Just like what we saw on Tuesday. Now let's take the situation where it's no more possible for us to have a reduction in the net export. That is, there is a restriction as to the amount of input that can come into our economy and the amount of output that can get outside of our economy in terms of our investments and all that. So this guy is fixed. So if that's the case, if this guy is not changing, then I cannot move back to this curve. I cannot move back to this curve then the only way that's where we might find ourselves in terms of our domestic market will be at this point. And at this point, our interest rate is going to be at R. And that will be our domestic interest. So remember, the government is restricting us. So we cannot move this curve down to this side to maintain the world interest rate. So we have to get ourselves here. So this is the interest rate that we have in the domestic market. With this interest rate in the domestic market, which we happen to find ourselves because of this capital control, one or two things will come out of it. The very first thing that comes out of this is the fact that we now have a new output, which is Y3. Right? We now have a new output, which is Y3. Now, in terms of the shift in the line, if Y2 is here, where is Y3 going to be in terms of the demand? Will it be above the red line or below the red line? Anyone to help me? Where is Y3 going to be in terms of the money market? Remember, Y3 is going to be a function of, exactly, it's going to be to the right, somewhere in between the two, because it's not shifting as much. So that's where I have my green line falling in between these two. So the red line is where we have Y2, The black line is where we have Y1. The green line will be where we will have M equals E P star L Y3 R star.
Oh, we have a question.
Sure, feel free.
But R changes in this case, will it shift more?
Exactly, that's a good question. So we still assume that the effect on Y outweighs the effects on R. Is that okay?
R increases and MD decreases. So we assume that, but because Y has increased over Y2 and the effect on money demand as a result of the increase in Y is stronger than the effect as a result of an increase in R?
Oh, yeah. It falls in between the two, yeah. Is that okay? Further questions?
Wait, did that make a... Oh, okay. So Alex says decrease in Y and increase in R both decrease MD, but I think the reference point is Y2 rather than Y1, correct? So Y is going up from Y2, not down from Y1.
So we have this guy here, right? So this guy here technically should have been R1, right? Because this line is coming from this interest rate, R1, not R star. This guy is R star, this guy is R star, this guy is Y, this guy is Y. But this guy needs to be R1, this guy needs to be Y3. On the naivety, on the naive scale, if we assume they all have the same interest rate, then this line should be straightforward. But where Alex is coming from is the fact that interest rate has also gone up. And with an increase in interest rates, we expect to see that there is a further reduction in the amount of money demand. That's a fair way of looking at it. But remember, the assumption here is the overall increase in Y has higher impact compared to the overall increase in R. So that's why I still maintain that it will be in between. Is that okay? Yeah.
So the... Oh, okay. So the green line is corresponding to Y3, the red line to Y2, and so on and so forth. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Sure. So what do we see here? The result of this capital control, if the government restricts the amount of money to come in and the amount of money to go out and all that, what we tend to see here is that this guy here will be the new exchange rate, which is what, E3. And with this exchange rate, you tend to see that there is less depreciation compared to when there is no capital control. That's one thing you have to keep in mind. There is less depreciation. There is less impact on how your money changes in terms of its price when there is capital control with this shock. So on one hand, you might want to say that, hey, if that's the case, then capital control is good because at the end of the day, our currency is not depreciating that much. It's okay to say that, but the trouble will come from this guy here. There is a reduction in welfare because when you live in an economy with a high interest rate, then it's very difficult for individuals to invest. If you want to invest, the interest rate is extremely high. So you don't want to invest. And as you decide not to invest, the investment level will come down. As the investment level comes down, you know what happens to output there as well. So that's one part of it. There is this welfare effect in terms of it reducing investment and reducing output. But on the other hand, there is a good effect in terms of it keeping your exchange rate from further depreciation. Questions?
Not at the moment, no.
Now, if you happen to find yourself in the room, please type your full name and type with it. So, yeah. Now, this is what you have in terms of the flexible regime, right? This is a diagram for the flexible regime. You might be interested in drawing the diagram for the fixed regime. And I'm going to draw the fixed regime right about now. The same line holds, but we have to keep E to be E bar. The same line holds for the fixed regime as well. For the fixed exchange rate, the same line holds, but we have to keep E at E bar equals 1. Let's see what will be the conclusion here. So here, there are 3 lines you have to understand, right? When there is no capital control, where we have the red line, then the central bank will have to come in and reduce money supply up until this point.
Oh, we have a question.
Feel free.
When you say less welfare, do you mean that people can import less compared to before? And what about the opposite? So for example, if people want to export more, capital control will reduce welfare as well, or what goes on?
Yeah, it's on the direct phase of it, that's technically true. But the other part of it is the interest rate, right? When you live in an economy where the interest rate is extremely high, that will affect your output as well. So that's where I'm looking at it from as well. Yeah, so it's okay for you to say that. Yeah, I agree. But at the same time, this guy also, yeah. Is it okay?
Yeah, seems okay.
Good. So we have this guy here, E1. We have this guy here. So when you don't have capital control and there is this shock, you have to reduce money supply from this point up until this point. But if you have capital control, you don't have to do as much. You reduce your money, but with the less effort. And that is to say, you have to reduce your money up until just this point, M3. So with a fixed regime is good for you, with a flexible regime is good for you as well. So all the 2 regimes is good in terms of you keeping your exchange rates pretty much stable when you have capital control, but at the same time, there might be welfare consequences in terms of the interest rate increment, and just like what Alex pointed out, it might also have an impact in terms of individuals trying to get in, be they a net exporter or not. So when you type your name late, of course, I'm just going to cancel it and give you 0 for that. So the time is very important. John, is there anyone with any question in there?
No, it doesn't seem like it.
So I'm going to cancel this guy. We're done with capital control. When you go in there to read the book, just keep an eye on that. So just a quick announcement. I tried to get the videos uploaded on Tuesday, which I did, but I realized my Canvas page is running out of space. And I tried sending them an email, but they are yet to get back to me. And I know for sure I've also reached out to those who have moderated in the first part of the course, whether they are okay making the video available on my website, and they were okay. If you happen to be a student and I cannot come across extra space for my Canvas, then I might be tempted to post it on my website. But that's a bit that's not up to me, it's up to the class. So if anyone has any concern as to whether we should post it on the website or not, please let me know. If you just say no, then I don't have the right to post it. But if everyone has given me the consent, then I can go ahead and make it available as soon as we are done for today. But I'm a bit skeptical about today because my Canvas page is almost out of space. So if you have consent, you can send me an email. Hey, Professor, I don't want it to be on the website, which is totally fine with me. Just feel free, right? There's not going to be any trouble for that. Hopefully, I get the space updated soon, and I'll just put it on Canvas. So let's see the additional points we have here. If we have further questions, please let me know. Shoot them. Let's see how we can solve them as well. So what I'm going to do right now, I don't think we can go to the New Keynesian model today. We'll do it on Tuesday. Oh, we can start a bit on the new Keynesian. Yeah, we can start a bit on the new Keynesian and maybe finish
We
it.
have a question.
Sure, feel free.
Is it possible to delete videos from before the midterm in order to free up space?
Yeah, that's a good one. But you know, Canvas, the way Canvas works is that you might want to go back and have a look at what you've done in the past. So if you've taken a course in the past and you want to see the materials or something like that, you can just quickly go back to it. So my concern there is, if I'm to delete it, will it be okay for individuals to go check it out, or would they have to come back to me and ask for access? I don't know how that will work. Is that okay? So just for future reference, if I delete it and someone wants to have a look at it, then I don't know how to give access to the person.
Oh, I had a question actually.
Sure.
Just clarifying something that came just before this. So in the previous example, well, I guess this would be both in a fixed and a flexible system. When you have capital control, and you said that it allows you to either reduce the amount of monetary policy you have to use in a fixed system, or reduces the depreciation of your currency in a flexible system, but that comes with a trade-off in welfare. I think Alex asked something along this line as well. So that decrease in welfare, does that come mainly from the increase in R or the decrease in Y?
I think both, because increase in R will automatically lead to decrease in Y. That's one part of it, right?
Okay.
They are really that respect. And what Alex also pointed out is also equally relevant. That is to say, whenever you restrict people along the lines of import and exports, or along the line of foreign investment inflows and foreign investment outflows, then that's also going to lead to troubles, right? So there are two ways of looking at it in terms of welfare. But for R, as you pointed out, with an increase in R, then there's going to be a reduction in the Y in that respect as well.
Okay, thank you so much. Oh, will capital control only be the case under fixed exchange rate regime?
No, even with the flexible regime, I think we saw that was the first diagram that we drew. That was a flexible regime. There's going to be depreciation, but it's not going to be that much. Yeah.
Is there, oh, sorry.
One. Yeah, go ahead.
Is there any way to judge which system comes out better with capital controls? Is capital control more important to a fixed system or a flexible system?
Actually, we don't know. We need to know, have more of the empirical data and see what's going on, but we can't. We don't have any special model to see the numbers. So for now, I've not come across any numbers to make a judgment, right? But on the base of it, what I can see here is there's something that we call trilemma. I don't think the book mentioned it, but in a way, it's trying to draw attention to it. So trilemma basically talks about either you're having a fixed exchange rate or not having a fixed exchange rate. Either you are having capital control or not having capital control, or either you are having ability to control your money or you don't have the ability to control your money. So these three particular policies are really important. And as an economy, you cannot have the three of them together. The maximum you can have is two, right? So that's where trilemma comes in. And you have to do a couple of combinations and permutations and see which one works for you. So I cannot pinpoint that capital control with fixed exchange rate is better, or I cannot say that capital control with monetary policy is better given a floating regime. I cannot make a judgment on that. It depends on the political situation of the country. It depends on the net export position of the country and all that. So we need to be a bit more specific.
Okay, thank you so much.
Sure. So now this is the last part of the chapter. Again, please feel free. If you don't want the videos to be there, please feel free. I can just maybe bug the guys at Canvas and they can give you more space. Now let's see this. The last part of this guy here is what we call the new Keynesian model, right? So up until now, we assume that there is no sticky price, everything was just normal. There's no sticky price, everything was normal, money is neutral, and all that. We have to introduce in a new idea from the sticky price assumption where money is no more neutral. There, what will be the implication? Right? The first thing we need to pay attention to here is the fact that the PPP is no more active here. The purchasing power parity that we saw is no more active in the flexible regime because the prices tend to be sticky. They don't change as quickly as we expect them to change. So PPP doesn't hold. Keep that in mind. As PPP does not hold, couple of implications. This guy here that we saw earlier, which is money demand equals P as a function of L, Y, and R, and we change this guy to E and we change this guy to P star, this guy does not hold anymore because there's no PPP. And when there is no PPP, obviously this guy is just going to vanish. So we still have to maintain the very old money demand equation that we saw earlier. Now, if PPP is not holding and the prices tends to be flexible, there are a couple of implications. And this is where Alex or John's question came in terms of net export. The implication about PPP not holding and having this guy here is that net export is now considered to be affected by the nominal exchange rate. So net export is now affected by the real exchange rate in the market. So if you live in an economy and the assumption is that we have a fixed regime, then with a fixed regime, we have exchange rates affecting the system. An example, imagine a situation, how does this guy play out? If domestic prices tends to increase with a given P and a given E, what do we tend to see here? Or if this guy goes up, what do we tend to see here? So how does this guy here affect NX? Is it positively related to the net export, or is it negatively related to the net export? That's the next line of action now. If I live in the market, or if I live in a domestic environment and the prices for my domestic environment is high, the implication is that exports and imports will be affected. So if the prices goes up in the domestic market, I would like to buy more from outside because my domestic price is high. And I would like to, those buying from me will not be willing to buy from me anymore. My export is going to come down as well. Or you might want to say maybe giving the same amount of export. The implication here is as your prices goes up, the demand for your good goes down. And as the demand for your good goes down, the amount of exports that you have, the net export also goes down. So it's negatively affected. So when this guy goes up, this guy comes down. So in a way, when this guy goes up, everything within this bracket goes down. And as everything within this bracket goes down, this guy goes down. So prices, domestic prices affect this guy negatively. What about nominal exchange rate? In terms of your nominal exchange rate, let's see what happens. When the exchange rate tends to go up, giving the same level of prices being sticky, not changing, we expect this entire equation within the bracket to also go up. And as they go up, we expect the net export to also go up. And that's what you guys were trying to point out on Tuesday. That is to say, when you have an economy where the depreciation sets in, because they are local, the amount of local goods becomes relatively, the price of local goods become relatively less expensive, their import goes down and their exports also goes up. And that will increase the net export. Remember, this is only possible within the new Keynesian model because we assume that prices are sticky. They don't change automatic to correct for any changes. Is there anyone with any question?
Yeah, actually, I've got a little question here. For the previous example with P going up, so if domestic prices go up, imports will go up because domestic prices have increased, so we want to buy more goods from outside?
It's possible that we might import more than what we have. So if, for instance, there's no transactional cost or there's no transaction cost, you wouldn't want to, and the price of apples here happens to be 2 and the price of apples outside happens to be 1, and you can easily go out and buy, then you just go out and buy. So your import increase and your export, nobody might want to have your export, something like that.
So they will decrease.
Yeah, something along. But the most important is how the E tends to affect the net export as well.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Questions?
No other questions now.
So this is the motivation for the new Keynesian model within the business cycle, where we open up the economy and we introduce in money. This is going to be very, very important. One or two things you have to keep in mind is how the graph will now look like. So unlike the earlier graph, this graph is going to be very different in terms of the factors to consider. So the money market graph, remember we initially had it as M equals E, P star, L, other function of R. This guy is no more there. There's no E. P is no more star. It's just going to be P.
Oh, we've got a question.
Sure, feel free.
So changes in E can affect net exports because of PPP not holding in this new model?
Yeah, PPP is not holding. Prices don't change automatic to maintain a certain position.
Okay, thank you.
And the prices will be on this side, right? There's a price. We have the prices. So just make sure you understand this guy here. Now for the market, please understand this guy. Just like the case of the sticky price for the earlier chapters, we assume there's an output gap. So there is no like initial point of maybe the market is clearing and all that. So you might want to assume an output gap and see how it plays out. So let's just point out that. So we have the amount of YD. I'm going to put in something here, so keep an eye on that. And then we have YS. Remember, YD equals C plus I plus G plus net export. Right? That's my YD. But what we just saw within the new Keynesian model was that net export is a function of E, which is P star over P. So this guy here is also a function of E. Right? Net export is a function of E. And if that's the case, I can modify my Y and say that Y is now a function of the exchange rate as well. So this guy is a function of exchange rate. Is that okay? So that's a new change to your new Keynesian model, with the key assumption that prices are sticky. And given that, then the exchange rate is going to affect the net export. John, I think we are just about time. So if you have questions, let me know. If there is none, then we can build up on this on Tuesday and finish it out. So we will start running our experiments hopefully on Tuesday. just let me know if you have any questions, and hopefully I can work on that. I don't want to go past the time for today. Questions in there, so you can leave if you're okay. If you have questions and you want to ask, I'm going to be here. Just ask. So and let's see what we can do. John, any question in there?
No questions right now, no.
Okay. Sure. If not, then I probably have to meet you guys on Tuesday. All good?
Oh, yes. We have one. Will we have any more quizzes this term?
Oh no, I think that was our last quiz, which was on Thursday. So we have 4 quizzes set up, right? So that was the last quiz. Yeah. When is the exam? I think on the 14th, right? 14th of August is, if I'm right. How many classes more do we have? Do we know?
I think maybe 2 or 3.
Oh, 2 or 3.
Sorry, 2.